Portainer started life as a tool for managing Docker environments. It soon expanded to support Kubernetes, then expanded again to be a multi-environment manager. It was through this multi-environment manager that Portainer found its home in the realm of edge compute or IoT management. Portainer allows you to manage many hundreds or even thousands of remote environments, all from the one central management console. And since Portainer has been self-hosted from day one, you have access to this edge management capability within the safe confines of your private network. But why should you consider Portainer for your edge or IoT solution? Because managing several Docker environments is really challenging. And managing many hundreds or thousands, well, that is near impossible without tooling. So let me show you how Portainer assists with your edge management. First up, let's get Portainer installed. Here I have an existing VM running standard Docker, and I'm going to deploy Portainer on this VM as the central management tool. So let's go to the Portainer documentation on docs.portainer.io. Here, click on Install Portainer BE. Then choose Set up a new server installation. Select Docker Standalone and go with Install on Linux. Here we have all the instructions. First, we can simply copy this command and paste that in here. This is going to create the Portainer persistent volume. Then we are going to copy the next command and paste it here. This command will run Portainer in detached mode, exposes the 2 ports it needs, names the container Portainer, connects it to the local Docker socket, uses the existing Portainer volume. Also, it is going to pull the latest LTS version of Portainer, which is 2.27.6 at the time of this recording. So here we go. It started downloading. Now, if we just run IPADDR, we can see the IP address for Ethernet is this. Let me just copy that. Come up to the browser and paste it and enter :9443. It is a self-signed certificate, so just accept the warning and move on. And now we are at the Portainer login screen. We have the default Portainer user. We will just need to set a password and hit create. Then we need to provide our license key. And here we go. We have Portainer up and running. Before enabling edge compute features in Portainer, it's important to ensure that your edge devices can connect to the Portainer instance. If these devices are on the internet, you will need to expose 2 ports on your server, 9443 and 8000. These are required for the edge compute features to work. Now to enable edge compute, go to Settings, then select Edge Compute, and toggle this switch to turn it on. This feature is fundamentally a product within a product. Now you will see there are 2 input fields. These define the IP address and port that edge agents will use to connect back to the Portainer server. If you're running a reverse proxy, for example, in a DMZ, you'll need to update these addresses to reflect whatever your proxy resolves as. In my case, I don't have one, so I will leave them as they are. Port 9443 handles agent polling, command queue retrieval, and health check. An 8000 is required for the remote tunneling feature, unless you're using the async edge agent. For highly secure environments, Portainer offers the option to enable MTLS across these connections. When enabled, Portainer performs TLS certificate validation between the client and server at the TCP level. Without this enabled, Portainer still ensures secure communication using PSKs for authentication. We also have the option here to enable or enforce the use of Portainer-generated edge IDs. Out of the box, you can specify an edge ID at the client end. An edge ID is simply a unique identifier that will allow the administrator in Portainer to uniquely identify the remote device. You can flip the switch here to turn this on, and then the administrator has to issue edge IDs for each remote machine, as opposed to the remote machine, using something like its machine serial number or some other unique identifier. So we just basically check these settings. If everything looks good, hit Save Settings. And now you will notice in the sidebar, you have the edge compute features available. So now that we have the server up and running, we want to start to onboard your device fleet. There are 2 ways to do this, 1 by 1 or NMOS. 1 by 1 is useful for POC environments or very small deployments. But anything at scale will need to use the auto-onboarding capability in Portainer Business. So let's onboard our first remote edge device manually. Click on Environment Related and add Environment. In this case, it's a Docker standalone environment running at the edge. So we will choose Docker standalone. Then choose Edge Agent Standard and give it a name. In this case, it is going to be Agent 1. Once again, it's going to make you re-verify the Portainer server identity. You can just check if this is correct. You can also add more settings here. And if you need to make some changes, like put it into a group or apply tags, you can do so. But we won't do that for now. So let's click on Create. As you can see, the current state is not associated. So there is no device currently beaconing in or identifying itself as this agent. This is now going to give you a script which you can run on your remote device. This will allow the remote device to connect to the Portainer environment. If we copy the script and switch to Agent 1, which is just a virtual machine hosted in the cloud, and paste that script in here. Now it is going to pull and run the LTS agent. Okay, so that is done. Now we can come up to the Portainer server. You can see there is a heartbeat. It means the agent has checked in. And we can hit close. If we go to home, you will see the agent is added. If we want now, we can actually click on this agent. You can click on containers and see the agent running on this remote device. So we have our singular agent running here. Now let's say you want to pre-stage many hundreds of devices and then ship these devices to the field. Let me show you how to do that. Under Environment Related, we have our Auto Onboarding feature. If we click on Auto Onboarding, and here you can choose the Edge Agent Standard. Now what we need to do is create a generic script that you can run on all of your devices. And when that script runs for the very first time, it will beacon back to these addresses here and announce to Portainer that the remote device is ready and waiting for it to be authorized for management. So let's just create a setting here for the Edge ID. Now, the administrator needs to know the identity of the remote devices so they can authorize them. In our case, we are just going to use hostname because the hostname is already known to us. But in production, you would probably want this to be a device serial number, an asset ID, or something that is uniquely identifiable for your business. So now let's go to Docker standalone and simply copy the script. And we will run this script on each of the remote devices. Now, I already have some agents, so I'm just going to run it on each of the agents separately, or each of the remote devices, I should say. And here we go. I have just onboarded 3 more devices with that generic script. Now, if I go to Home, we can see there are 2 devices available for management. And if I go to the waiting room, where devices are announced when they are not yet ready for management, we can see 3 devices. So you have onboarded your devices. Now what? Well, we need to create logical groups of devices in a grouping that is relevant for your use case. It could be as simple as plant or factory or production line, or something geographical, for example, Northwest USA. Just create a group structure that suits your needs. Be aware that groups are used as deployment targets, so by grouping devices, you are creating a logical element that you will later target against an application deployment. Now, let's create some groups for logical segmentation. So if we go to Edge Groups here, you can see we have no groups available. And if we click Add Edge Group, you can create 2 types of group here. You can either create them statically by simply selecting devices and manually adding them into a group, or you can use dynamic matching, where we will use tags. Tags are associated to remote devices to automatically add devices into groups based on either a full match, where devices have to have all of the tag that we identify, or partial match, where some of the tags should match. But right now, we have no tags. So let's go and create some. In the sidebar here, you can see we have tags. So let's create a tag as Plant 1. Let's create another tag. This is Plant 2. And one more called Plant 3. So we have got 3 plants already defined as tags. Now we can come back into Edge Groups again and add an Edge Group. Let's call this the Plant 1 group. We can set it to dynamic. And we want the devices to be added into this group if they have the tag Plant 1. As you can see, there are currently no remote devices or remote environments in this group. So we can add this. We will do the same thing for plant 2. Dynamic, plant 2, and create. Another one is plant 3, dynamic, plant 3, and create. Finally, another one called all plants, similarly dynamic, and select partial match. Choose all tags, plant 1, 2, and 3. So devices will be added into this all plants group if they have either the plant 1, plant 2, or plant 3 tag. Let's add the group. Now you can see here, we have 4 groups and no environments. Now we can admit the remote devices into the environment for management, and we can apply tags as appropriate. So let's get some devices admitted from the waiting room and associate them into groups. If we go to the waiting room and select Agent 2, we want to associate and assign. So let's do it. We are going to add this to the tag Plant 1. Now for Agent 3, we are going to associate it to Plant 2. Then Agent 4, we are going to put it into Plant 3. Now if we go to Home, you can see we have got all of the agents available for management. And if we go to Edge Groups, you will see we have 1 environment in Plant 1, 1 environment in Plant 2, 1 in Plant 3, and 3 in all plants. Now, if we click on this, you will see Agent 2, 3, and 4 are in this all plants group. Now that we have your devices onboarded and defined into appropriate groups, so we can start to deploy our apps to the fleet. First, you need to decide whether the application you're deploying will use the same configuration across all devices, or each device needs its own custom setup. Portainer makes it easy to push these configuration files to remote devices, so your app deployments can leverage these customizations at runtime. Let me show you how it works. We'll start by opening Edge Configurations, then click Add Configuration, and give it a name. I'll call it Edge Configs. Now let's say you're deploying an app to the devices in multiple plant locations, like the ones in the All Plants group, but each location needs a slightly different config. Whether that's a plant location identifier or slightly different config file, Portainer gives you the option through Edge Configurations to push a config file to all devices in a remote group. So we can actually say we want a config file that gets placed in the var/edge directory on every remote device. At this point, we choose the type of configuration we're deploying. General is for the same file on all devices. But if each device needs its own config file, we'll go with device-specific configuration. Then comes the important part, the matching rule, which tells Portainer how to match each file to the right device. Now, to push the configurations, you'll need to upload a zip file. Inside that zip file, there should be a set of config files, each intended for a different device. These files will be placed into the var/edge folder on a remote devices, based on this matching rule. And the match is made using the device's host name. Portainer will look for the file that matches the host name and copy it to the correct path. If you're working with more complex setups, the zip file can also contain folders, each folder named after a specific device. Inside those folders, you can place 1 or more config files specific to that device. Portainer will identify the right folder based on the device name and copy its contents into the var/edge directory. Now to understand this, I have 3 HTML files, each named after a different device, and each of these HTML files has slightly different content, like the device name and its IP address. So even though the structure is same, the details are unique to each device. Now all we need to do is zip the directory and upload it. Then click on Create Configuration and push. Once the configuration is deployed, we can check the var/edge/configs directory on each remote device. Here we can see that only the HTML file that is matching the device's hostname has been copied. So this is a way for you to push configuration files to remote devices, which you can use in your application deployments. Now let's say we want to deploy an application. So we can come in and say, I want to add a stack. And again, each stack is a way of deploying an application to multiple groups. And so I can say, I want to deploy to all plants. In my case, I'm just going to do a simple Nginx server. And it is Docker Compose deployment, so I'm going to get a Compose file and just paste that here. In this case, it's just an Nginx deployment, and it's going to deploy to all plants. Now we can come down here and say, I want a webhook. So if we need to make changes to this, we will be able to trigger the webhook which will cause the edge stack to be redeployed. And if we had to authenticate registries, we can choose the registries. If the image is coming from a private registry, you can add your authentication credentials, if you have any defined. And if your image is quite large, you can pre-pull the image before initiating an application deployment. This is not so important on the first deployment, but on updates, this might be really important if you want to minimize downtime. And there's retry deployment. If you have environments that's somewhat unreliable and you need to restart the deployment or retry if it fails, you can turn this on. And Portainer will retry this in case of failure. Now, when it comes to updates, how would you like to roll out updates to this group? So we can just deploy this application to all devices concurrently or roll them out. Now, if you want an exponential rollout, we can basically start and increase as we go. Or number of devices where you can have timeout updates, update delays, failure actions in case the deployment fails. So let's just choose all devices at once and deploy the stack. This is now going to deploy the application. Now, what we will see here is that the page will refresh in 10 seconds. And you can see the status is deploying. You can also see here, 3 of the remote devices have acknowledged the deployment. 1 out of 3 have already received the instructions from the command queue. All 3 have now received. None of them failed, and all 3 of them are running. Now, if we click on this and click on the environments, you can see the 3 agents have received, and they are running version 1. Now let's say, for example, we want to make a change, and we want to say, look, I want agent 1 now. Agent 1 is now going to be tagged with plant 1. Update the environment, and now agent 1 will be assigned to this tag. If we come back to edge groups, you will see that plant 1 now has 2 environments. And if we return to edge stacks, you will see that it's deploying again. And what it's doing actually is rolling out the 4th update to that device. If we check here now, you will see we now have all 4 agents running the application. So that's how you deploy applications using Portainer edge stacks and roll them out across all the devices in your fleet. Now let's say you want to run a scheduled maintenance task on a remote device. Portainer lets you run a job on the native OS of the device using edge jobs. Let me show you a simple demo where we will clean up /var/logs every day. And edge jobs is a way of running a script on remote devices that runs outside of Docker. So this will run on the host itself, and you can perform maintenance and service actions on the underlying Linux environment on your remote devices. In my case, I'm going to say clean up logs, and I want it to be recurring, and I want to run it every day. And I want to run the simple rm-f var logs, just to clean up the logs messages. I want this to run on all plants, which includes all the devices, and create the job. This is now going to create a job, which is going to clean up the logs on each remote device. Obviously, this is not going to run right now. But if it did, you can come into results where we can retrieve the logs for the devices and check the results on a daily basis to see whether these devices had actually executed that cleanup and removed any logs. So let's go to edge jobs. You can use this to update things like your firmware. You can do apt-get update to update the Linux package files. It is completely running inside the host OS, so there is no reliance on Docker. You can even start and stop Docker, and even repeat this on a schedule if needed. Now let's set up a custom template in Portainer. If you're planning to reuse the same setup across multiple deployments, creating a template is a good idea. I'll be using the configuration we already deployed to the agents. But before that, I'm going to remove agent 1 from the group, as it doesn't have a config file. Now that agent 1 is out, the rest are all set with their configurations. So let's move forward and create the custom template. Head over to Edge Templates, then select Custom. Now click on Add Custom Template. Here, give it a title and description. Then paste in your Docker Compose file. In this example, we're deploying another Nginx container. I'm mapping port 8081 on the host to the container. I'm also binding a volume. Specifically, we're attaching a custom HTML config file to overwrite the container's index.html. Our config files, which we deployed, are stored here, where Edge ID is just the host name. That way, each device gets a unique HTML file mounted in the container. So let's go ahead and create the custom template. Once that's done, we can jump over to Edge Stacks and click Add Edge Stack. From here, select a template. Here you can see a lot of built-in templates from Portainer, but we're choosing our custom template. You'll notice the Docker Compose we added earlier is now auto-populated. Give the stack a name. And for the target group, choose all plants. Now click on Deploy the stack. Now our custom template is rolling out to all 3 edge devices. Once it's deployed, open it and head over to Environments. You'll see the deployment was successful across all 3. Now let's test it. Open the IP of Agent 2 on port 8081. You'll see the custom HTML page we designed for Agent 2. Do the same for Agent 3, same port, but a different HTML page. And Agent 4 shows its own version too. This is how we can deploy a custom template and use it to deploy stack using Portainer. So now you have seen how you can use the Portainer Edge Compute features to manage your remote fleets of Docker devices and deploy applications to them. Thanks for watching.